And good day, folks. This is Eric Rollins, the Constitutionalist, here on 1550 KXEX, the best talk in town. Mostly I want to focus on the big, beautiful bill, but we have this ghost episode that I hope we will be able to recover that last week talked about Trump's big gamble, kind of what all the big gamble he made by bombing Iran. And I had a few more thoughts that after I went back and reviewed that I really should have brought out. Are you aware that Hezbollah, Iran-funded terrorist Hezbollah, why Iran called on them to support them during the war with Israel, and Hezbollah did nothing. They didn't help them. So is Iran a paper tiger? Were they the big bully on the block that everybody was afraid of, but they're really not as tough as we thought? I don't know. They have somewhere around 90 million people, a little more than double California. Israel has somewhere around 10 million people. It's a little less than 10 million, if I remember right. And Israel now controls all airspace. So all of our mainstream media was saying, well, this is going to cause World War III. And that, well, the bombing really, all we did was buy a couple of months. Do you think Iran can rebuild if Israel continues to control the airspace over Iran? And Israel's saying they're doing that. Also, something that's huge is both Russia and China had agreements with Iran that they would step in if anybody attacked them. Wait, can you hear the crickets? Because China did nothing, and Iran and Putin out of Russia said a few things, but did nothing. So that's kind of a big deal. They stayed out of the war. They didn't escalate. Yet our media, they're crying wolf. Oh, this is going to be World War III, and it didn't happen. We do have a ceasefire. Now, ceasefires in the Middle East, they don't last very well, is the truth. Hope it's going to last. Want Trump to find a new path to deal with the Middle East. We'll see. It's not that I don't support Trump and I absolutely want peace. We don't have a great track record there. Our country, the surrounding countries, they seem to like to fight, and there's a whole lot of people that think that Israel needs to cease to exist in that region. So it's kind of tough. Now, Russia's proved they're not a paper tiger because they've gone in and they've fought in a very real way, largely to a standstill in Ukraine. So I'm not going to refer to Russia as a paper tiger. They're willing to fight. China, on the other hand, I don't know. They've got all these threats. They're going to take Taiwan. They build islands in the middle of the ocean and then claim that that's their land in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. They're trying to steal all of the international waters around the Philippines, Singapore, etc. And they've got all these threats. But here they had the agreement with Iran, and they did nothing. Iran, even now it's come out, said, well, we could shut down the Strait of Hormuz and control all oil tankers that are going through. And China said, no, don't do that, because that's where 50% of the oil comes from that we get from the world. And China, just like us, we can pretend like it's different. Our economies are largely based on the power that comes from oil. So, is China a paper tiger? Looks like Iran's a paper tiger. Maybe China's a paper tiger. So it's also a big deal that Russia and China, they agreed that they would protect Iran if something happened, if they were attacked, and they did nothing. But what does that do to their cred around the world? Because both of those countries, particularly China in recent times, they've run around and they've made promises all over the undeveloped world. Third world countries, all over Africa. Yeah, we'll protect you. Yeah, we'll do this. And then they see that they did nothing in Iran. I think that that shakes any faith that people had that China is going to keep its word. Why they would have believed that they would keep their word in the first place, I don't know. But here's one more piece of evidence that China doesn't keep its word. China's on shaky legs. And most people don't realize that. You know that there's now been several studies, like the Japanese were curious and they looked at salt consumption in China. And you kind of know if you got a certain number of people, you need a certain amount of consumable salt. And the numbers weren't adding up. In other words, they're saying that China has a much smaller population. India's now, 2 billion? China was claiming it was almost that. And it's looking like they might be somewhere close to 500 million less people. Their economy's in shambles right now. They've got a property crisis. They've got a whole bunch of real estate that's been built or is waiting to be built. Money's invested. Chinese people's hard-earned money, and they're sitting empty. You've got youth unemployment that's so bad, we don't know, because China, and for my friends on the left that think China's great, China won't even put out government numbers as to how many unemployed youth there are. When things started to look bad, China's solution was we stopped publishing the numbers. So we don't know exactly how well they're doing, but we know that when you watch videos, and I watch videos on a regular basis about China, things are empty. China acted tough when Trump stepped in and said, well, we're going to put tariffs on you because it needs to be fair both ways. Well, they sell us 5 times more stuff than we sell them. So when we put on the tariff, who gets hurt? Again, the left media, the mainstream media, oh, the sky is going to fall, the sky is going to fall, the sky is going to fall. Oh, this is just, you're aggravating China and it's going to end up in World War III. I think they like to sensationalize, but what we're finding is, no, China came to the table after acting tough because they're a culture where it's very much about saving face. So they had to act tough. But now we have an agreement on tariffs. It's not 100% done, but we have an agreement with most of the countries around the world. Part of why China had to come to the table is because Vietnam, who for a long time has been the little brother of China, largely controlled by China, they'd had enough. They were tired of being told what to do, how to do things. They're also a communist country like China, but they're embracing capitalism in a lot of ways. So I have hope that maybe Vietnam will pull its head out of its proverbial rear and become a more freedom-based country, but at least it's a country with economic opportunity. And unlike China, where China wants to control everything, no international business can do business in China without the Chinese branch of that company. So say Apple goes to China and they set up a plant to make iPhones. The Chinese government owns 51%, meaning controlling interest of everything that happens with that plant in China. Vietnam, on the other hand, just wants to cut a deal and make some money because they want economic prosperity. So some of those surrounding countries that China was largely controlling, now they're breaking away and they're going, well, if China won't make it, they want to fight with you, we'll do it. We're in. So this is really a Trump win. Anyway, getting away from that, I just thought it was kind of interesting that everywhere you turn, Trump seems to find wins. So going to that, continuing that idea of Trump seems to find wins, we're going to go to our first little clip of how Trump is doing with Republicans, specifically Republicans, from the Liberal Hive Mind. So shout out, I love the Liberal Hive Mind podcast. Let's go ahead and play that.
The concepts, we got some stuff to get into, so let's roll the tape. All right, folks, so just take a look at this.
So we're going to look at the strongly approved number. So this isn't just Republicans who like Donald Trump. This is Republicans who love Donald Trump, and he's up like a rocket. Look at this. In July 2017, the strongly approved was 53%. That's pretty good. But look at where he is now. 63% of Republicans strongly approve of the job that Donald Trump is doing about 5 months into his presidency. 63%. That is a huge, huge base. And of course, it's just part of a Republican base in which about 90% of them overall approve of him, including the somewhat approve. So why don't we look back? We have all the presidents, Republican presidents, going back over the last 35, 36, 37 years. What are we talking about? GOP, who strongly approved 5 months in. Look at this. George H.W. Bush, Bush 41, 46%. Bush 43, 59. You see Trump, the first term, 53. But look at this. 63%. He beats all the other Republicans on the board here. And I was looking even back since Reagan. And get this, Donald Trump beats Ronald Reagan when it comes to the strongly approved 5 months. And of course, Reagan was coming off that high after that assassination attempt. So the bottom line is Donald Trump is making history with the Republican base. He is more beloved by this Republican base than any Republican base loved any GOP president 5 months in. It is history making. If you're a Republican lawmaker, you see this 63%, you say, my goodness gracious, you do not want to go against Donald Trump because the Republican base is with Donald Trump. And it's not just the polling. We actually have the data to show that the Republican base is with Donald Trump. The Times Trump endorsees won the GOP primary for governor and congressional races. Look at this. 2024, 96%. 2022, 95%. 2020, 98%. The bottom line is this. 95% plus of the time, the Trump-endorsed candidate wins in GOP primaries. And even in the cases where Donald Trump endorses a challenger to an incumbent, the majority of the time, that challenger wins.
Yeah, so much for Trump voter regret, huh? And keep in mind that 63% is not his total approval rating. It's just the strong approve column, which makes it all that much more.
All right, so I see that as a huge deal. When I watched that clip, and the sweetest part, it was on CNN. CNN had to talk about how Trump is energizing his base. Did you hear, folks? Trump is more popular than any president. That includes my hero, Ronald Reagan, with people within his own party. 90% approval, somewhat approve, or strongly approve of Trump. 63% of the GOP or Republicans strongly back Trump. And it's gone up since he took office. Now that's interesting. If everything he's doing, if everything he's doing is not working, I'm online with I have a lot of people on Facebook. They generally claim to be Republican. They generally claim to be conservative. I'm not so sure that they all are, because there's quite a few of them that do things like they'll bring up one issue and go, well, do you regret voting for Trump now? No, I don't. And then they'll bring up another, well, what about now? No. I expected that there would be some bumps in the road, but the things that are most important to me, Trump is handling. Like, did we shut down the border? Yep. That was huge to me. Are we going to get tax cuts? Yep. Are the tax cuts expanded from where they were when he put them in I think it was was it late 2016 or early 2017? It was 2017. So they're bigger because now we've got no tax on Social Security, no tax on tips, no tax on overtime. And the state and local tax deduction went in, and it's bigger than before. It used to be $10,000. Now it's a state and local deduction, the SALT tax, that you can take off your federal income tax, of up to $40,000. Now, I'm generally for tax cuts, however you slice them, because I see government at its best as inefficient, and at its worst, well, they're outright corrupt crooks that are wasting our money. I'm not accusing Trump of that, but that seems to be when you give a group of unelected bureaucrats power and money, they find ways to spend it, and they always want more of it. So how's this big, beautiful bill going to affect California. Sorry, folks. I guess I'm like Rush Limbaugh, wrinkling the papers. I'm old school. Don't have a laptop. So back to that idea of how is California affected by the big beautiful bill? What are the impacts? Well, first of all, I just want to say not a perfect bill because I would have loved more spending cuts. I would love for the spending cuts to be more accelerated. There's some in there, but some of them, they're happening in the future, not now. Don't like that. But he can come back and they can address spending cuts at another time. This is a big compromise bill. And we have a slim margin in the House and a not strong enough margin because you need 60 votes to really override anything in the Senate. But we got two things. We got some border security. It's not perfect, but better. We got tax cuts, which are great. So we locked down tax relief, which is nothing but good. Even though the Congressional Budget Office, which Trump needs to get rid of those people and put in people that realize when you give a tax cut, only every time in the history of the United States when we gave a major tax cut, something always happens. When Kennedy did it, when Reagan did it, when Clinton did it, when Trump did it, when they gave a major tax cut. The Congressional Budget Office said, well, if you give these tax cuts, then, we're going to be more in debt. No, that's not what happens. What happens is revenues go up. The reason we're more in debt is because then the power-hungry politicians that it would be an insult to say they're acting like drunken sailors about spending money because drunken sailors have more discipline. They spend more money. All we have to do is hold the line on spending and grow the economy. And then our position, because it's not just total debt, it's debt to gross domestic product. We should begin to shift that, things shift. So awesome we got tax cuts. Awesome we got multiple types of tax cuts. So I'm thrilled about that. The SALT deduction, that's a huge deal to anybody that's got money. Now, why would that be a big deal? Because the Democrats always talk about, well, everything's just for the rich. If you're poor, can you start a business that hires employees? You might be able to start a sole proprietorship, and I would encourage everybody, find your dream, reach for it, work for it. In this country, it's available, which is one of the greatest things about this country. But until you have a certain amount of wealth, it's hard to create very many jobs for other people. So giving tax relief to everybody makes sense, but it also makes sense to do that for the rich. And if government's confiscating money from the rich, what useful thing is the government going to do with that money? Well, they're going to give it away to the poor. Okay. Then did it turn into more money by them creating a product or a service that people want? Or did it just create a dependent class and move us one step closer towards socialism? So not everything's perfect. In this big, beautiful bill, illegals can still get health care. I do think they will come back and they will address that. So one of the big problems with Medicaid in California is that Lord Newsom, long may he reign in his wisdom, has decided that he needed to give away as much health care to illegals as he could. Now, why would he do that? I think it's because he thinks that eventually there's going to be a liberal president and they're going to find a way to give everybody amnesty. And I want everybody to go get in line. If you've been here forever, you still got to go get in line. You should have to pay a penalty if you've never broken a law. So you've never been in trouble, and if you never took welfare of any sort, then I have no problem with you paying a penalty and just getting in line. If you broke a law, you've been in jail, or you've taken welfare, I'm not so much a fan of the idea of you getting even the tiniest bit of amnesty. And I don't want amnesty in general. I want people to have to go through the citizenship classes, become a citizen the right way. I want immigration because as I think of the friends I've got, some of the most patriotic, hardest working, most successful people I know, they're first or second generation. They're the doers in the world, and they've come here because they want to embrace a better life. Well, that's how it largely used to be. They wanted to come to work. Now the world, when we threw open our borders, it's not so clear that that's the case. That now, as they come through the door, they got a $2,000 check for housing, and they got money, they got a free phone, and our NGOs got them good clothing, a ticket, either bus or plane ride to wherever they wanted in the U.S. And those NGOs, by the way, that's government money. Largely, as we're finding out through U.S. aid, that Doge found out about that government money. So you're paying for somebody to sneak across the border, to not respect our laws. I got a problem with that. So what it comes down to is there was some welfare to work reform also in the big beautiful bill. That you gotta, if you want Medicaid or you want various types of welfare, you need to work 20 hours a week. Now I see that as a pretty minimal thing because I can't think of any time in the last 20 years when I only worked 20 hours a week, and there has been a couple times where I was so sick that I could barely get out of bed, and I still, by the end of the week, managed 20 hours. Most of the time I work 60. Occasionally I work 80 because I'm a little insane. But I love my job. I'm blessed to have found a job where I get to do this for fun, and then I have another business that I run, and that's the great thing about this country. Here's my problem with this work to welfare. Illegal immigrants are exempted at this point, and they had to do that to get it through the Senate. Now, I think this comes up. This should be an individual issue, and heads need to roll on this one. Any congressman or senator that thinks that's a good idea should be fired from, I say fired, meaning next time they come up for election, you need to vote for almost anybody else. One of my heroes, Rush Limbaugh, often said, and it was kind of a joke, but I don't know that it's so wrong, that you could open up a phone book and pick the first 5 names, and they'd be better than most of the Democrats and some of the Republicans that are in Congress. You pick random people that have never done government before, and at least I like their odds of being honest. Well, I hope it's not quite that bad with the Republicans. I'm convinced that it is at least that bad with the Democrats. So they did get some policies on fraud on food stamps in the big beautiful bill, which is a huge deal. And we're going to go ahead and come back to that idea and take our first break. This is Eric Rollins, the Constitutionalist, here on 1550 KXEX, the best talk in town. I want to say thank you to everybody that's listening on social media. Please like, subscribe, share, get the bell notifications. Depends on which platform. We're on multiple platforms, and I'm thankful for the opportunity. I do this enthusiastically. It actually cost me money to do this, but I'm not asking for you guys to help me pay for it. I'm okay. I love doing this. I just hope that I can get out a message that represents conservatism and represents a constitutional perspective. Let's go ahead and come back. And this is Eric Rollins, the Constitutionalist, here on 1550 KXEX, the best talk in town. So getting back to that idea of how does the big beautiful bill affect California? Well, I talked about one of the things that has to do with the welfare to work and some of the reforms. So there's some policies that have to do with fraud on things like food stamps. And there's been now some research done that somewhere around 13.6% of all the food stamp money is fraudulent, meaning somebody signed up that really shouldn't be signed up. And the federal government only allows for 6% fraud. Yes, I'm sad to have said that. Somehow 6% fraud is okay, but 13.6 is not. Well, when states have a higher level than 6%, the federal government penalizes them by making them pay the difference. Now, California's broke, so I don't know how they're going to get money out of Governor Newsom or Sacramento, but because Newsom has given welfare, and I'll have people that'll go, well, no, they can't get welfare. I know people that work in the welfare department. I know people that work at Social Security, personal friends. There are illegals absolutely getting welfare, getting food stamps. Well, because Newsom has gone out of his way to make sure that nobody prosecutes on that because it is technically illegal, that means that our fraud rate, in other words, people getting food stamps or other welfare that they should not, is much higher than what the federal government considers acceptable, which is the shameful 6%. The state is supposed to pay that difference. Now, that's kind of a big deal. But again, California has voted for pretty much nothing but left, nothing but socialist, communist Democrats, and common sense has disappeared in California. When I meet people from out of state, and I regularly do because of what I do for my other job, they come through as tourists, and I'll frequently have conversations, and they talk about, wow, you've got great soil, you've got great weather, you've got the coast, you've got timber if you wanted it. They talk about all of these resources. And then they're like, but you have more homeless than anybody. But you have no common sense. You have no parental controls, or very little parental control. It's all about the state mandating schools. We got AB 1955 that basically makes it government policy that if a kid wants to change their pronouns or begin the process of having a nip and tuck, then the schools are supposed to hide that from the parents. Now, I would think that the schools would be obligated by state law, except we changed state law, to tell the parents about any significant issue that happened with kids. That seems reasonable, but common sense is gone in California. And we keep voting the same way. But I think that maybe we've had enough after we've seen the incompetence. You know, we're 6 months, pretty close to 6 months now from the fires in LA. And one of the big places where they voted in a way that I consider to be shameful, they have not really addressed that issue, that there's very few building permits, that almost nothing's happened 6 months later. Now, North Carolina, we look at the disaster, and the federal government gave those people, what was it, $700? And said, good luck. And yet, their roads are cleared. Many of the houses are built. There's permits. Things are getting fixed there. And in LA, nothing's happening. And people are seeing this, and they're going, wow, we've been voting for incompetent fools for how long? You know, because Newsom was on the city council in San Francisco for 8 years. Then he was mayor of San Francisco for 8 years. By the way, he had a homeless plan starting when he was in city council. Then he was lieutenant governor for 8 years. And now he's been governor for 6+, and he had a plan for homelessness. Nothing happened. Anyway, I got sidetracked there. One of the other big deals that I think is particularly a big deal for California is the Big Beautiful Bill cuts back on the Green New Deal. Now think about that. How does that affect California? Well, California is so insane that they tried to tell people you have to buy an electric vehicle. You want to buy an electric vehicle? I believe in freedom. If you believe that's the best choice, or frankly, some of the Teslas are kind of like sports cars. Pick what sport. If you can afford a sports car, pick the sports car you want. I've ridden in a friend's that he has a very nice Tesla. The thing's kind of amazing. But he can't convince me that it was a better deal because I look at how much extra he paid. And he says, well, I don't pay for gas. I said, well, what does your electricity cost you now that you charge it up at your home? It's way up, but he can't answer that because there's no individual meter on that. He's like, well, the rates have just gone up. Well, you paid more than $10,000 extra because of the fact that it's electric. Again, it's your sports car. He's got a fun, great car. I'm not knocking Teslas. I'm just saying I believe that there should be freedom in the market. In California, that's one of the things that California tried to impose in the federal government in the Big Beautiful Bill addressed. So for at least a little more time, because we had till 2035. Now we've got more time where the combustion engine will still be there, and maybe that gives electric enough time to be fixed, or maybe it's red hydrogen, or maybe it's compressed natural gas. But compressed natural gas is not considered green energy because it burns a fossil fuel, yet it's highly efficient. This state constantly wants to impose green initiatives. Another crazy thing, this one the Big Beautiful Bill doesn't affect, but absolutely a California thing. Hydroelectric power is not considered green energy in California. It is everywhere else. Matter of fact, in South America, which country was it? I believe it was Ecuador. They're building a great big hydroelectric plant because they consider it green energy. But here in California, it's not green energy. So it doesn't count. And our state has mandated that, a certain percentage of all energy has to be green energy no matter what it costs. And then they put a little dictatorial board completely staffed. So the people on this CARB board, California Air Resources Board, every one of them is either a Brown appointee. Most of them now are Lord Newsom's appointees. And then our legislator and our government go, oh, well, CARB said, the fourth branch of government said, so I got to back off. They said. Now, I wish the Big Beautiful Bill would address the fact that our state just raised our gas prices, but let's face it, there is federalism. States do have rights. I do have the opportunity to move to a different state, and that's what a lot of my friends are doing. I have 2 leaving this week, which I'm sad about. I'm not going to do that. I'm here for the fight. Bring it on. Keep bringing the insanity, because I think eventually, from my perspective, people should have woke up 20 years ago, but eventually, if you beat somebody over the head with stupidity often enough, if you constantly show your incompetence, if, like Governor Newsom, you never take any responsibility for anything you've done. For instance, recently he talked about how things were Trump's fault. This was about 3 months ago. He talked about how everything was Trump's fault and how the economy was Trump's fault. Joe Biden was in office at the time. I guess it was a little more than 3 months ago. But no Trump policy had been implemented. That is typical of what's happening in California. And then the fourth place, states were trying to put in a bunch of regulations on AI, so artificial intelligence. And the federal government put a moratorium on that. Now, AI, as much as we talk about liberal and conservative, AI actually has the potential to be something great, but it also has the potential to be something that is a terrifying challenge. If AI was implemented much like China, where they have a social credit score, where they've got cameras everywhere, where if you don't behave in the way they like in China, in any of the cities, there are consequences. And the government decides how you should behave, who you should be, what you can talk about. AI has the potential to eliminate any and all free speech it doesn't like. So AI is scary, but the place for AI innovation in the United States, one of the biggest places, you got Austin in Texas, and you've got a place, is it Miami in Florida? There's one area of Florida that is known for AI development, but largely it's the Silicon Valley here. And our state was moving in to regulate it. Now, I don't trust Sacramento at all, though I get that there's federalism and the states in some cases should decide. But there's federal legislation in the Big Beautiful Bill that addresses AI, and maybe the federal government knows better. This is like the genie's already out of the bottle. Let's hope and pray that it comes out of the bottle and AI becomes a force for good, because it does have that potential. We're going to go ahead and we're going to play our last clip. This one's just for fun. So often I hear people talk about youth, and kind of the perspective is, oh, well, those, they don't know anything, and they're on the wrong side of issues, and every kid is just on the left. Here's a kid that's not on the left, that's using culture, in this case, rap music, to get out a message that's actually conservative, and he's pretty good. This is Tyson James' son. Oh, what is his son's name? Toby James. Let's go ahead and play that.
What are we talking about? What is the plot? If you are a Susie, you can't be a Scott. I know it's a doozy, can't be what you're not. Ain't getting to heaven with nail paint. It's gonna be hot where you're going, that's Hellgate. They gon' have fun with your soul, gon' be jailbait. There's only two, you put more weight, it felt great. I'm homeschooled, I don't follow them. They look like alien hollow men. He coming back, he gon' swallow them. I follow God and I'll never acknowledge them. I look around, I see a circus. All of these trannies are making me nervous, but I serve a big God and I got a purpose. All of these demons will burn in the furnace.
Every day a new gender. I post the truth to the youth and you censor. Can't seem to get rid of me, do better. It's 2023 and still there is only two genders. Two genders. I quote the facts, you delete, you too tender. Man, y'all gotta do better. I love the Bible and it says there's only two genders.
So that was really just for fun, folks. And that song is a little bit old. I ran across it on Instagram. I'd forgotten about it. It's just fun. But there is hope. Our founding fathers looked at all of these checks and balances that they set up. They set up 3 branches of government, not 4. That they enumerated the powers of those governments, and from their minds, those enumerated powers, in other words, the list of powers that each branch of government had, it had a lid on the bucket. We've largely taken the lid off the bucket, meaning government, because we don't have informed citizens, because we don't vote at a rate that really makes a difference. For instance, about 40% of Christians are not even registered to vote. Now, I would like to think that there's not a separation when they go to church between church and home, and that those biblical values might go home. I think that the biblical values, they slant not necessarily Republican or Democrat, they slant conservative. If they voted in a more conservative way about preserving what's good about society, that we'd have a better country. So We need people that understand the principles of the Constitution to protect it, that value self-government. Well, if you just sit on the sidelines, you don't vote, you don't go to a city council meeting, you don't get involved, do you really value self-government? And then if you don't do those work things to maintain what we've got, the great Ronald Reagan, and I could not find the video of this, darn it. He talks about this. We're only one generation away from losing what we've got. In other words, we're only one generation away from losing the freedoms and liberties that we all get to enjoy. Now, we're right on top of what I consider to be one of the most important holidays. Christmas is great because it's about family and it's about God, and that's good, and same with Easter. But right after those two, Halloween's fun, St. Patrick's is pretty good, but we've got one called Independence Day, where a group of men, in this case they were white men, but that's okay because they started something great. And eventually the principles that they wrote down in the Constitution, the war that they fought against England, those principles of limited government and of defining the liberties of the people and then saying, yeah, and we got to double down on that. It's not just that we defined some of the people's freedoms, but if we didn't actually talk about it in the Constitution, guess what? Either the states get it or the people get it. And that's why we had the Bill of Rights, 9th and 10th Amendment. Enumerated powers, 10th Amendment. In other words, the ones that are defined and written down. There's supposed to be a bucket on those, and anything that they didn't address in the enumerated powers in the 9th Amendment, unenumerated powers and stuff they didn't write down, falls to the people. Kind of cool that they were smart enough to realize government can't be trusted. It requires people to be involved to keep politicians' feet to the fire. And now that we are right on the verge of what I consider to be the American holiday, Thanksgiving again, good, love turkey. 4th of July, on the other hand, I find I'm smiling all week. I'm proud every time I see flags. I'm so glad that culture has shifted, and now places like Old Navy, Target, instead of selling pride stuff, they're selling flag stuff. Because if this country is going to survive, if people are going to protect its the liberties that we've got, and the liberties we have here based upon the Constitution, they protect the whole world. If we fall, where else is there truly free speech? There's some versions of it, but in England, if you post the wrong thing, particularly about LGBTQ, in other words, if you have a different opinion, I'm guessing that song that I just played, if I posted that and I was an English resident, I would be in trouble. They have come in England, in Germany, if you post the wrong thing on social media, they come, and I don't mean wrong thing like you're threatening violence. I mean you have a different opinion, but don't call for violence. The government comes and gets you. They're trying to use that to intimidate you. Well, our freedoms and the Bill of Rights, that is the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, they all enshrine those freedoms. They define those freedoms. And then they realize that while they define a lot of it, they don't put it all down. They realize maybe we didn't write everything down. Guess what? Government doesn't get those rights. Yet if you're not paying attention to what's happening locally or statewide or federal, and you're just sitting on the sidelines, somebody will make the decision. That's the one thing that's guaranteed. The left, particularly the progressive left, that I believe they're cultural Marxist, whether they'll admit it or not, they're eagerly there, eager to go, well, all we have to do is confiscate everybody's money and take control, and then there will be utopia. That's the socialist dream. That's the communist dream. I would consider it impossible to find a communist country where you go, let's see, not only were they economically successful, because you could argue that China's up till recently pretty economically successful, but they had to embrace capitalism at least somewhat to become economically successful. But if you have something to say that's mildly different than what the government believes you should be saying in a country like China, you disappear. You might never reappear. You go to jail. So which successful communist country is there? I'd say none if you have two measures. One is economic freedom or economic prosperity, and then you add in liberty. So there's none. Well, what about socialist countries? They're not quite as extreme. The idea is kumbaya, and, we embrace our diversity and we all just get along, right? I'm not so sure that works, because even the Nordic countries like Norway, Sweden, Finland, Denmark, all of those countries, while they have a high taxation rate, it's easy to open a business. There's very little regulation on opening a business. You can run your own private business. So it's not true socialism. What it is it has some socialism elements, and they're moving away from that. If you look at the Dutch and Geert Wilders, love saying that name, he has led a Dutch Farmers' Party that they've had enough of this globalist, liberal elite that the EU lords over. Think of the EU as like a weaker version of the federal government here in the United States. And you might think of the Netherlands, the Dutch, as a state. It's not exactly right, but it's close. And they've had enough. In Germany, the biggest party, the ADU, Alternative Deutschland, I think is, we'll go with ADU. ADL, not ADU, ADL. They're a nationalist populist party. They're on the right. And they are the largest party in Eastern Germany. And I think they're soon going to be the largest party in Germany. They won number 3 in the election. They're the only party that showed tremendous growth. And you're seeing this type of thing all over Europe. Well, I think it's inspired by the fact that we have somebody like Trump, who's a nationalist populist. He has shown that if you fight against this system, that you listen to the people. Notice Trump is fighting for issues that the people want. And that's why he's at 63% strongly approve, and almost 90% of all Republicans are like, yes, Trump, go. This inspires the world. We're not in a vacuum. The whole world gets to see what's happening. And now with 4th of July, we have an opportunity to go out, see friends and family, talk about your values. Everybody stands around the barbecue and talks. Well, I'm going to be talking about my values. I'm going to be embracing my First Amendment right. This is the best country in the world, folks. And I want to thank you for listening today. And I want you to have a great time on 4th of July and realize that it is the birth of a nation that spawned freedom around the world. This is Eric Rollins, the Constitutionalist, here on 1550 KXCX, the best talk in town.